Welcome to today's video. Now, I've got an interesting one. I want to know why Norway seemingly is very successful whilst not being in Europe and under the rule of Brussels. But when we did Brexit, which I was very much against, it has been a complete and utter cock-up. Let's find out.
57 billion euros. That's Norway's trade surplus with the EU in 2023. A staggering figure for a country that, like the UK, operates outside the European Union. But unlike Britain, Norway's economy is thriving. How? By leveraging its membership in the European Economic Area, Norway enjoys nearly unrestricted access to the EU single market, benefiting from free flow of goods, services, and capital.
Can I just say straight away, that was one of the biggest selling points, isn't it? A part of being in Europe is that free trade deal. Everything is smoother. There's less paperwork. Everything is easier. I know after it happened, farmers and things were so angry because they just couldn't get rid of their product. They couldn't get rid of their farm produce and things. And it's everything now is paperwork, and luckily we haven't seen it yet, but when we're traveling, for example, there will be visas coming in, and it's just like I just want to go away, and it's a pain in the ass
while retaining its independence from Brussels. Now, let's contrast that with Brexit Britain. Instead of economic growth, the UK has seen decline in GDP compared to its peers. Trade has slumped, business investment is weak, and labour shortages are hitting hard. The promises of sovereignty and global opportunity haven't yet replaced the economic ties severed with the EU. So why does Norway's path outside the EU seem like a success story while the UK struggles to find its footing? Let's unpack the surprising economics of life outside the EU and why one country's model works while the others hit roadblocks after roadblocks. Norway's relationship with the EU is built on the European Economic Area, or EEA agreement, signed in 1994. Think of the EEA as a bridge that connects the 27 EU member states with 3 non-EU nations, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. This agreement guarantees Norway access to the EU single market, a vast economic space where goods, services, capital and people can flow freely across borders. While Norway abides with many EU rules, it's not an EU member. Instead, it strikes a fascinating balance between integration and sovereignty. Let's examine the perks of the Norway model. Due to the EEA agreement, Norway enjoys the benefits of economic integration with the EU. The access to EU single market has supercharged Norway's economy, helping it climb to the 6th richest country in the world by GDP per capita.
Very good.
The agreement also guarantees the 4 freedoms of the single market, meaning Norwegians can live, work and do business seemingly across EU nations. And businesses in Norway? They are thriving with access to a diverse workforce and expanded markets. The result is an inevitable standard of living, fueled not only by oil and gas revenues, but also by a dynamic trade ecosystem.
If you think about it, that free trade deal that you had under the EU, why would you buy? So, for example, if you've got one shop, all right, that opens its doors freely, you walk in the supermarket. There's another supermarket next to you, but you have to try and put in a PIN code and guess what PIN code it is before you can get in. That is like what it is with the UK. It's so much harder to trade because of all the paperwork and bureaucracy around it. Why would you bother? Why would you bother? You would choose the countries to trade with that it's easy and sensible to trade with. And if Norway are in this kind of halfway house where they're sort of in and out, perfect for them.
What's fascinating is that Norway has managed to stay outside the EU policies on agriculture and fisheries, 2 areas crucial to its identity. By doing so, it protects domestic industries from direct EU competition and maintains full control over its rich fishing waters, a vital sector in rural Norway. And while Norway isn't part of the EU's custom union, which adds some bureaucratic hurdles, it gains the freedom to craft its own trade deals with countries worldwide. This flexibility has allowed Norway to keep its options open, negotiating trade agreements that serve its national interests. However, Norway's autonomy comes with trade-offs. While it must adopt most EU laws to keep its single market privileges, it has no formal say in shaping these laws. This lack of democratic control, when Norway has to follow the rules without a seat at the table, is a sticking point for many critics. Imagine playing a game where the referee decides the rules, but you never get to vote. Another drawback: financial contributions. Norway pays a hefty sum to the EU budget as part of its single market access, without enjoying full EU membership
But they're getting
benefits.
plenty
Some
back
call it
from
an
that free
expensive
trade.
arrangement for a country that's not even an official member. Politically, the EU debate has long divided Norway. Should it join and gain a voice in Brussels, or stay out and keep its independence? The answer has been a resounding no to membership so far, but the discussion remains a hot topic. But why the Norway model works for Norway? At the heart of Norway's success lies its massive sovereign wealth fund.
Can I just say, yeah, so Norway has a big sovereign wealth fund, so they've got a lot of money. But if you're going to gain the benefits of something, you should still contribute to it, because clearly the amount that you're gaining it outweighs how much you have to contribute in the first place. So it still seems pretty much a win-win.
Built on revenues from oil and gas, this financial cushion has allowed Norway to invest in its welfare state while staying selective about its EU commitments. The country also enjoys exemptions in justice and home affairs, ensuring it keeps control over sensitive national policies. By participating in the EEA, Norway cooperates on policies like research, education, and consumer protection, gaining from EU advancements without full political integration. But there's no sugarcoating it. This arrangement works so well because of Norway's unique economic and geographic position.
I think that sums it up. Basically, Norway as a country is very, very rich, and therefore they can afford to do it. That's what I'm going to say. That's what I'm going to assume here. They can afford to do it. If it was a different country in the same situation, in terms of what the deal was, maybe they couldn't afford to do it. You know, Poland, for example, which I've looked at a lot at, they have benefited so much from being in the EU. Financially, support, technology, all this, they have benefited so much. But if they weren't a part of the EU and they were trying to do this same deal, maybe it wouldn't be as productive for Poland. So maybe that just literally having all that wealth already is the big step up they need.
Replicating the Norwegian model elsewhere may not be as straightforward. Interestingly, the Norway model gained attention during Brexit discussions as a potential solution for the UK. Why? Because it's about as close as you can get to the EU without joining. However, Norway's position, tailored to its specific needs and priorities, shows that this model isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. By staying out of the EU but maintaining close economic ties, Norway has created a system that blends the best of both worlds. The question for other nations is, can they replicate Norway's success, or is this model uniquely suited to the land of fords and fisheries? Let's
Quite
compare
possibly.
the economic realities of two nations, Norway and the UK, which are charting very different economic paths. On one hand, we have Norway, an economic powerhouse with a strategy deeply intertwined with European markets. On the other, post-Brexit Britain grappling with underperformance and challenges it hadn't fully anticipated. Norway's story is one of calculated collaboration. While not an EU member, Norway enjoys close ties through its European Economic Area or EEA membership. This agreement grants it access to the EU's single market and enforces the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. It's a system that worked wonders for Norway. As 67.5% of Norwegian exports go directly to the EU, with mineral products such as oil and gas leading the way. This positions Norway as the 6th most important trading partner of the EU in 2023. The relationship isn't just about goods though. Norway has also secured a positive balance in trade services, further cementing its economic stability. What's remarkable is how Norway has turned its natural resources into a strategic advantage. While the EU has been reducing reliance on Russian gas, Norway has stepped up, becoming a critical
now they're
energy
going to do it
partner.
all.
Now, contrast this with post-Brexit Britain, where the decision to leave the EU has cast a long shadow over the economy. According to Goldman Sachs, the UK economy has grown 5% less than comparable advanced economies since the referendum, a shortfall driven by reduced trade, weaker businesses investment, and declining immigration from the EU.
I would love to say we were under the Tory government then. And it's funny because the Tories are all about business, saving money and all this sort of stuff. Well, businesses are weaker. Trade is weaker. Immigration, yeah, you're good. People want to leave, but because they don't want to live here because it's no good anymore. It's not because it's not for you're doing a good job. It's just the country's turning to shit.
Goods trade has underperformed by around 15%,
Not
and
good.
business investments have stagnated below pre-referendum levels. The promise of Brexit freedoms hasn't quite materialised
What
in
Brexit
terms of
freedoms?
tangible
That
economic
was a lie.
gains. Trade agreements such as the one with Australia are expected to add a mere 0.08% to GDP annually. Well,
I know. Let's trade with the country that's pretty much furthest away from us. Yeah, there's a Tesco's right next to us. Nah, screw it. Let's go all the way around the world to the Tesco's that's over in Australia that don't think they have Tesco's, but that's not the point. It's stupid. Surely we should be trading with people on our doorstep. Bloody Tories, bloody right-wing, idiot, working class, nationalists, racists. Dumb, stupid.
larger deals with nations like the US remain elusive. Meanwhile, shifts in immigration patterns, replacing EU labour with less economically active non-EU migrants, have strained labour supply, contributing to inflationary pressures. Perhaps the starkest metric is real GDP per capita. Since mid-2016, UK growth has lagged significantly, rising just 4% compared to 8% in the Eurozone and 15% in the US. Inflation, too, tells a grim story. UK consumer prices have surged by 31% over the same period. While the UK navigates this challenging terrain, Norway's economic model offers a striking contrast. By maintaining strong ties with Europe without full EU membership, Norway has safeguarded its economic interests, balancing sovereignty with collaboration. Two nations, two strategies, and two very different outcomes.
What it comes across here is the fact that Brexit was embarrassing, and it was when you had people like Nigel Farage in Brussels saying, "Oh, you're listening. You didn't believe me, but now you do. All this nonsense." That hurt relations. Europeans just look at Brits and think, "You idiots." It's laughable that Europe was laughing at us, whereas Norway, clearly, they're still friends. They're still working together for the greater good. Whereas we've just almost cut ties and made other countries laugh at us, maybe annoyed at us. I don't know, but there's a difference. You should be friends with people that you want to try and trade with, for starters.
It's a story of opportunities seized versus opportunities lost, a powerful reminder of how choices shape economic futures.
Yes.
In Norway, politics operate on consensus. The country's decision to stay outside the EU while maintaining close ties wasn't just a political move, it was a pragmatic one. Now, compare that to the UK. The Brexit referendum in 2016
led on racism.
Wasn't just a decision about leaving the EU, it became a deeply polarising issue that divided political parties, regions, and even families. The aftermath has been a governance challenge of epic proportions. Unlike Norway, where EU relations are more or less a settled matter, the UK has struggled to find consensus. Every step of the Brexit process, from negotiating trade deals to reimagining immigration policies, has been mired in political bickering. This polarisation has made replicating Norway's model almost impossible for the UK. Why?
Yeah.
Because the Norway model requires stability and a willingness to compromise. It demands a commitment to align with EU rules without a formal say in their creation, something that's politically unpalatable in Britain. But here's the irony. Norway's quiet cooperation with the EU allows it to punch above its weight economically, while the UK's determination to chart its own course has led to trade shortfalls and economic stagnation. So, while Norway's political climate fosters pragmatic decisions, the UK's ongoing polarisation makes such a model hard to implement.
Unfortunately, we still have that right-wing, racism, and it's there is no compromise. There is no compromise at all. It's either our way or the highway. It's cutting your nose off to spite your face. That is exactly what the situation is, and there's no let up. You can't. We can't make a good deal because we're not willing to make a good deal that suits both parties at the end of the day, and it's embarrassing. It's just so embarrassing to watch, honestly.
It's a fascinating contrast. One country prioritizes harmony and results, while the other grapples with the challenges of a divided political landscape. When the UK decided to part ways with the European Union, there was no shortage of suggestions about how it could maintain close ties with Europe while charting an independent course. Along the proposed solutions
what can we get for
was
ourselves?
the Norway model, a setup that allows Norway to access the EU single market without being a formal member of the Union. But for the UK, adopting this model isn't just impractical, it's fundamentally at odds with the principles driving Brexit. Let's unpack why. One of the loudest rallying cries for Brexit was the desire to take back control.
Oh, it's nonsense.
This meant regaining the ability to make laws and policies without interference from Brussels. However, the Norway model demands that participating countries align with EU laws and regulations, including freedom of movement for goods, services, capital, and people. Norway, like other EEA members, has no vote or formal representation in EU decision-making bodies. It's a textbook case of being a rule taker, not a rule maker.
It just makes me so angry. It makes me so angry because it's the rhetoric, that taking back control. The EU wasn't doing anything wrong in a sense of, it's like, illegal immigrants was the big thing. It was the big thing that working class people would use as an excuse to vote for Brexit. The problem with that was, actually, the EU laws are pretty straightforward. It's the government that weren't doing what the laws were, in the fact that if immigrants come over, they have to contribute, they have to work. That's the way it is if you go to another country. And if they don't, then you can send them back. Well, if you can't control who's coming in, you can't control if people are contributing and then getting rid of them, that's not the EU's problem. That was our problem. But we blame the EU. I say we, I didn't. But the country, the Tories that were wanting it, the bloody UKIP that they were at the time, they're the ones that were pushing it, and that's the rhetoric they were doing. And it was bad, and it was lies.
For a post-Brexit UK, this would be a political non-starter.
To others.
Taking financial services, the UK's economic crown jewel. Under the Norway model, regulation of this critical sector would largely fall to the EU, effectively handling control of rules affecting companies like HSBC and Barclays to countries that may prioritise their own interests. The UK would lose its seat at the table, leaving decisions about its financial lifeblood in the hands of others. For a nation that prides itself on sovereignty, this arrangement is untenable. The Norway model also upholds the EU principle of freedom of movement. This was a sticking point for many Leave voters who wanted stricter immigration controls. Adopting the Norway model would mean accepting continued immigration from EU countries, a clear contradiction to one of the Brexit's main goals. For a government keen on showcasing control over its borders,
they forget that we can also move as well.
Another key driver of Brexit was the promise of greater democratic accountability. Many Leave voters felt that the decisions affecting the UK should be made in Westminster, not Brussels. However, the Norway model offers no such remedy. Norway's status as a non-EU member means that it has no direct say in the formulation of the laws it must follow. The same would apply to the UK under this model, further fueling concerns about a democratic deficit. Norway's economy is built on oil and fisheries, sectors largely excluded from EU single market rules. This allows Norway to exercise significant sovereignty in its most critical industries while accepting EU regulations in less vital areas. The UK's economy, by contrast, is dominated by services, particularly financial services, which are deeply intertwined with EU markets. Under the Norway model, the UK would become a rule taker in these areas, effectively ceding control over its largest economic sectors. Moreover, while Norway has used its vast sovereign wealth fund to offset the costs of its EEA membership, the UK lacks a similar financial buffer. Paying into the EU budget without full membership benefits would be a tough pill for British taxpayers to swallow. Even if the UK were to entertain the idea of the Norway model, there are practical hurdles to consider. The European Free Trade Association, or EFTA, which forms the backbone of the Norway model, may not welcome the UK. Norwegian politicians have expressed skepticism, fearing the UK could disrupt the delicate balance within EFTA. Some have bluntly stated that admitting the UK would not be in Norway's interests. Additionally, the Norway model involves a web of agreements far more complex than just EEA membership. It covers everything from Schengen border policies to trade and security cooperation. Navigating these agreements would require significant concessions and compromises, outcomes that are unlikely to satisfy hardline Brexiteers.
Yeah.
The Norway model
We're not known
may
for
work
compromise
for Norway,
now, are we?
but is ill-suited to the UK's post-Brexit aspirations. It fails to address the UK's desire for sovereignty, democratic control, and immigration restrictions, all of which were central to the Brexit vote. Furthermore, the structural differences between the UK and Norwegian economies, coupled with political resistance from both sides, make this option more of a fantasy than a feasible solution. For the UK, the post-Brexit path is less about copying an existing model and more about forging a bespoke agreement that aligns with its unique priorities. The Norway model might look tempting on paper, but in practice is a square peg in a round hole. The Norway-UK comparison underscores a critical lesson. Staying economically connected to Europe, even without EU membership, can cushion the blow of separation. Norway's access to the single market ensures smooth trade flows and economic stability, even though it means following EU rules without having a seat at the table. For the UK, opting out of these structures brought sovereignty, but at a tangible cost to trade, investment, and growth. Ultimately, the choice between independence and integration isn't just about politics, it's about weighing the long-term economic impact. Norway shows that collaboration can pay off, even if it means giving up some control. The UK, meanwhile, highlights the risks of breaking away without a clear plan to replace what's been lost.
A really, really interesting video, and I think, as they say in the film The Girl Next Door, was the juice worth the squeeze? No, it was not. Look, I think there's in Britain, especially at the time, and even now, there's too much divide. This created so much divide. There was no real plan. It was a case of should we leave the EU? That was it. There was no real plan. You had slogans on a bus about bloody having more money for the NHS, but that was a lie because they didn't know that was the case. But I think it's what sums it up. There's 2 points here. Norway probably have the riches in sectors that are less affected by being outside of the EU, and we don't. And also the fact that maybe the Norwegians are more cooperative than the Brits. Maybe the Brits are too confrontational. If you look at Farage, like I said, Farage in the European government, chambers and stuff, he's not exactly put Britain in a good light. He is a bad, stupid idiot of a man who just wants his own limelight. It's difficult because we're suffering from it and not all of us voted for it. And it was that close that it's so difficult to say we voted for it. We didn't vote for it. It was such a tight vote. And I don't think if we had a revote now, I don't think we would have voted to leave. Simple as. Very interesting. It's great to see that Norway has succeeded where we haven't. And this video showed why, the differences between the two countries. Very, very interesting. But if you've got any more input, let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe. All the socials are down there. And as always, I will catch you next time.